Good evening, everyone, and welcome to OSDIA Interviews Live. Tonight, I am joined by my esteemed co-host, National President Bob Bianchi. Bob, how are you?
Doing great, Lisa. Thank you.
And Justin Smith, our amazing moderator. How you doing, Justin?
I'm great. Thank you.
Tonight is a very special show as we spotlight the partnership between Sons and Daughters of Italy in America and one of our charitable foundations, Cooley's Anemia. And joining us from the Cooley's team is Catherine Janetta with her adorable son, Nicholas.
Hi, thank you for having us.
Absolutely. We also have Craig Butler, the Executive Director of the Cooley's Anemia Foundation.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
We also have Joe Rondanelli, the current chair for the OSDIA Cooley's Anemia Foundation Committee.
Pleasure to be here.
Yes, I'm so happy to have you. And do we have Nick tonight? We have Nick Berzicelli, immediate past president of the Grand Lodge of New Jersey. Good evening, Nick.
Hello, guys. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for joining us here tonight. And thank you, our audience, for tuning in. Please fire away with your questions and comments in the comments on Facebook, and Justin will get to you later on in this episode. But Craig, let me start with you. What is Cooley's Anemia and what is the history of the foundation?
Sure, I'd be glad to answer that. And I'll, by the way, if I go on for too long, please feel free to cut me off because I can talk all night about this if you let me.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
Cooley's anemia is an inherited blood disorder that's also often known by the name thalassemia. So you may hear me use the word thalassemia or Cooley's anemia. For all intents and purposes, they mean the same thing. So this is an inherited blood disorder. It's genetic. And in this instance, it means that a person who has this blood disorder doesn't have hemoglobin that works right. And hemoglobin is the part of the blood that gets the oxygen and takes it around to your body so that it can be nice and healthy and use all that oxygen. But if a person has Cooley's anemia, it means that part of their hemoglobin doesn't work right. It can't take enough oxygen around to the body. And if the body doesn't get oxygen, it develops an anemia. And in the case of Cooley's anemia, if it's not treated over time, the anemia becomes so severe that a person can die from it. It'll cause their heart to stop working or other bodily functions to stop working. So it can be a very serious disorder. And there are many other details about it that I won't go into right now, but I do just want to mention that this is a disorder which is disproportionately found amongst people of certain backgrounds, and the Italian American community is one of them. And the reason for that is that it's possible to just carry the trait for Cooley's anemia and not have a severe form of the disease. And people who carry the trait are thought to have a resistance to malaria. So it's thought that the trait probably developed in Italy and other countries as a way to protect people from malaria. But unfortunately, if two people who each have the trait decide that they're going to have a child, there's a 25% chance with each pregnancy that that child is going to inherit non-functioning genes from both parents, and that results in Cooley's anemia. So one of the things that we do like to encourage people, especially all of our friends at OSDIA, that we like to encourage them to do is to find out if they're trait carriers, particularly if they're considering starting a family. And it's really easy to do. The first step to find out if you have the trait is to ask your doctor to look at the CBC, which stands for complete blood count, which almost everyone already has in their medical record, and to look at a part of that that's called the MCV, which stands for mean corpuscular volume. And if that MCV reading is an 80 or below, and if you're not iron deficient, you may carry the thalassemia trait, and you can then have a couple of other blood tests done that will confirm that or let you know that it's not the case. So that's in a nutshell, that's what Cooley's anemia is. And I won't go into all of the more details about it, except to say that the treatment for it is lifelong blood transfusions as often as every 2 to 4 weeks for those patients that have the most severe forms of it. And the blood transfusions, although it's a big burden to have to go through that for so many years, although they help to take care of the anemia, but they also put so much iron in the body that the body doesn't know what to do with it. And so it just circulates it around, and eventually the iron says, okay, I'm going to leave the blood and I'm going to settle here in the heart, or I'm going to settle in the liver or the pancreas or the thyroid. And over time, it can cause very significant damage, and it can lead to heart failure or liver failure, lots of thyroid problems, growth and development issues, diabetes, osteoporosis, often starting amongst severely iron overloaded patients, even in their teen years, pulmonary hypertension, and a lot of other issues. So one of the really big challenges for people with thalassemia or Cooley's anemia is to try to get rid of that iron. And to do that, they have to take a medication which is called a chelator. And for many years, the only way that they could get that medicine into their bodies was to stick a needle into their stomach or their thigh and pump it into the body for 8 to 12 hours every night. Now, we're fortunate that in recent years, there have been some oral drugs that have come along, some pills that people can now take, which help to do that same job. A lot of our patients still have to take the infusion of pumping it in, but a lot of our patients are also taking the oral chelators, and that's had a significant change for a lot of our patients.
Lisa, I'm curious, Craig, can you give us an idea of how many people in the United States have this condition, and what does life look like for them? Because we know that a lot of younger people are affected by this.
Sure. So there aren't hard facts on this because it is a rare disorder, thank goodness. But we keep a database of all the people that get in touch with us to let us know that they have thalassemia. And we have a little over 1,400 people on our database. We estimate that there are probably between 2,000 and 3,000 total in the United States that have a severe form of the disorder, and that probably around 2 million people in the United States carry the trait for thalassemia. So fortunately, things have gotten much better for our patients over the years because of the advances in treatment, but it's still a very difficult disorder. And I don't know, I'll briefly go into it, but Catherine might want to talk a little bit more about what it's like on a day-to-day basis. Right. But I'll just mention that having to get blood transfusions every 2 or 3 weeks by itself can be an enormous burden, not just on the patient who has to go in there and spend really the entire day at the hospital, because they have to go in and go through all sorts of tests and wait for blood to get sent up to them and get it transfused into them, but also for the parents who have to go along or guardians that have to go along with the younger children. It requires usually taking a day off from work or from school every 2, 3, or 4 weeks, depending on what your schedule is, and it can be significant.
I can't even imagine. And to that point, we'll bring in Katerina and her adorable son, Nicholas, to share her story as to how Cooley's anemia affected her family.
Thank you so much. It has affected us in such a huge way. My husband and I, as Craig had mentioned, we knew we were trait carriers. We had our first son, and we were under the impression that we wouldn't find out if our first son had it until they were a year old, and then they would get tested. And that's exactly what happened with our first son. When he turned a year old, we got him tested. We found out he had the trait. We were like, thank God, we have a healthy son. He only has the trait like us. And a couple of years later, we decided to try again and leave it in God's hands. And I was completely blindsided by Nicholas's diagnosis, because I found out after a week of him being home from the hospital and being born. I thought we wouldn't get him tested until we did, like with my older son at a year old. And we were home from the hospital only for a week, and I got a phone call from St. Children's Hospital in Philadelphia. I thought they were calling to ask for a donation. And I said, look, I'd be more than happy to help and give a donation. If you can, please call back in a month. I have a newborn baby here. And she said, no, I'm actually calling in regards to your son, Nicholas. And she said, we received his newborn blood screening. And she said, it shows that he is not producing any adult hemoglobin. And as soon as she said that, I almost dropped the phone. I knew that our worst nightmare was coming through. And like I said, I was blindsided because I didn't expect that we would even test him until he was a year old. And here she was telling me his newborn screening was saying he's not making adult hemoglobin, and we think he has Cooley's anemia, and you need to take him to the hospital to get extensive blood work done. And that's what we did. And from there, that day that I actually found out, I immediately reached out to the Cooley's Anemia Foundation. Prior to having any kids, I found out I was a trait carrier, and I looked into it, and I found the organization, the only nonprofit organization in the country helping any patient with the disease. So I held on to their information, and that day I immediately reached out to them online. And within 24 hours, Eileen and Sandy both contacted me and really helped to calm my fears, because a lot of the information out there, other than their website, showed that kids were dying at early ages. And, to be a mom and have a brand new baby, to find out he has this condition, and then to see this outdated information was very terrifying, to say the least. And, like I said, I reached out to them within 24 hours. They calmed my fears. They let me know that a lot of the information out there was outdated, and they helped me. They put me in touch with other families that also had children going through this, so that I could have a strong support system. And probably within 3 or 4 days, they mailed me out a huge binder with a bunch of educational material, so that my husband and I could educate ourselves to the best of our ability, so that we could be an advocate for Nicholas. And they also gave us at that time a list of the top thalassemia centers in the country, which to this day, there are only 10 of them. And we felt so blessed that one of them was Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and it was right in our backyard. And Nicholas had his first transfusion actually at only 6 weeks old. And he continued to have to get blood transfusions every 3 weeks, and would continue with that schedule for the rest of his life. By the time he had his transplant right before his 4th birthday, he had already received 75 blood transfusions. And as Craig had mentioned, those hospital days were very challenging, to say the least. I was blessed. I was able to stay home when he was born, and we found out he was sick. It's a full-time job. Every 3 weeks, like Craig mentioned, we were at the hospital for an entire 8 hours, and we would go there. And because he was an infant, he had very small veins, and it was really hard for them to gain access to put the IV in. And I'll never forget, there was one time in particular, he was only 9 months old, and they had to poke him with 9 different needles before they could get his vein. And it wasn't something where, he doesn't have good veins today, bring him back next week. It was like, no, you had to get it in, because he needed that blood to keep him alive. So to see your newborn baby scream and crying, and to have to get poked that many times was terrifying. And then, as he started to, once we would get the IV, and thank God it was okay, because he wasn't mobile. He sat in his little chair, but, I can recall a time when he was about maybe 16 months old. And at this point, he was now able to move and get around. And at that time, I was now sweating bullets, because he would have his IV attached to this big pole, and he wanted to be on the move. And he's trying to run down the hospital corridors with an IV attached to him. And I'm chasing after him with the hospital pole, a nervous wreck that he is going to rip that IV out of him. And we're going to have to go through that traumatizing experience, all over again. So every 3 weeks, that was a typical day for us. And then, as Craig had mentioned, every time you get a blood transfusion, there's iron in that blood, and they have no way of taking it out before they transfuse an individual. If you don't get that iron out of your body, eventually it's going to attach to all your organs, and it's going to cause organ failure and early death. So we had to start an iron chelation medication. Most of these medications are not indicated for children under 2. So we couldn't start his medication until he turned 2 years old. Once he turned 2, we decided we wanted to go with the oldest and safest one on the market, just because it had been around for so long and studied. Unfortunately, it was Desferal, a phenomenal medication. The unfortunate part was it was a subcutaneous injection that we had to give him every night, either in his stomach or in his thigh. You had to switch up the spots so that his skin didn't get didn't swell up too much, and it was in pain from the night before. But every night I would give him numbing cream in one of those areas, like 45 minutes before I would have to give him the needle to get his pump going for the night. And he would scream and cry every night. And he had to sleep with that pump for 10 hours at a time. And the medication went into his body slowly, but you knew it was working because in the morning, when I would take his diaper off, or at that time when he was potty trained, it comes out in your urine, and it's actually a rust color. And it was so scary to see that for the first time, because you see that come out and you're like, my God, if you don't get this out, imagine what that's doing to the organs inside his body. So that's what life was like for us. And by God's grace, I'll never forget, it was mischief night, October 2018. His hematologist called me and she wanted to go over some blood work with me. And then she said, Catherine, I have some good news for you. And she said, in the National Registry, 5 potential matches have come up for Nicholas for a bone marrow transplant. And we cried our eyes out together on that call. And this is what we have been praying for every night. You know, at that young age, Nicholas every night would go to bed and we would say our prayers and he would ask Jesus to cure him. He knew at that young age that he didn't want this life anymore. And we spent the next 6 months researching, consultation after consultation with Children's Hospital. Even though they're one of the best children's hospitals in the world, we didn't want to just commit to something. We were told there was a 95% chance that he would be cured, but there was also a 5% chance that he could die from it. And that 5% chance was enough to rattle my bones. So once again, the foundation was a huge help to us. I reached out to them and, you know, I had a long conversation with Eileen about, you know, the pros and cons and what to do. And I told her I needed to get second and third opinions before we could even make this decision. And I said, Eileen, every time we've reached out to you guys for guidance, which it has been a lot of times, I said, you have always guided us in the right direction. And she put me in touch with a phenomenal doctor out at one of another thalassemia treatment center out in California. And we also spoke to a physician in Italy where it's a lot more prevalent. And ultimately, 5 months later, we finally decided to go through with that transplant. But this little guy actually helped us to make the decision. Nicholas told us he didn't want this life anymore. And when we found out about the transplant opportunity, it was in October and Nicholas was only 3.5 years old. And we didn't mention it again to him in over 4 months because we didn't know what we were going to do. And one night I put Nicholas to bed. We were going to meet with the transplant team again the next day to ask them more questions. And I gave him a kiss. I left the room. And as I went downstairs, Nicholas called out to me out of nowhere. And mind you, again, this is 4 months after we ever even mentioned a transplant to him. And he said, Mama, what if I died right now? And he stopped me dead at my tracks. And I said, Nicholas, don't ever say that. I said, you're not going to die. And I went in his room and I sat down on the floor next to his bed. And he said it again. He said, but Mama, what if I died right now? And I said, little buddy, you're not going to die. I said, but if you did, you would go to heaven. And he knows all about heaven because we always talk about God. And he looked at me at 3.5 and he said, Mama, do I have to use my pump, his chelator, and go to the hospital in heaven? And I said, no, buddy, you don't. And he said, then I want to go to heaven. And I had to hold back the tears. And I said, buddy, Mama's not ready for you to go to heaven yet. I said, this is why we pray to Jesus every night to heal you. So you don't have to use your pump anymore. And you don't have to go to the hospital anymore. And you can still stay here with Mama. And he looked at me at 3.5 years old and said, well, then how about I go and stay at the hospital and those people heal me? And I was like, oh my God, I couldn't believe what this little boy had just said to me when we hadn't mentioned a transplant to him in 4 months. And I gave him a kiss and I said, well, buddy, tomorrow we're going to go to the hospital and we're going to talk to the doctors about that. I said, but in the meantime, you get some rest. And I gave him a kiss and I left the room. And the first thing I did was immediately grab my phone and send myself a text message as to everything I had just conveyed to you all because I wanted to make sure that I never forgot that conversation. And I should also mention to you that day before this conversation happened, Nicholas was at preschool. No one was home. It was just me. And I was sitting there looking at the bone marrow transplant book and information that the Cooley's Anemia Foundation sent me. And I was bawling my eyes out to God, and I was crying, and aloud, I was saying, God, I need your help to make this decision, and I need it right now. And I was pretty much like down on my knees, bawling my eyes out. And it was that exact night that conversation with Nicholas took place. So when I left that room, the other thing that two things became really clear to me. The first one was, I knew God was real, because after crying out to him that day and that conversation with Nicholas happening, I knew he had to be. But the most important thing that I took away from that was Nicholas made it very clear to me at that moment what he wanted. He either wanted to be cured or he wanted to be in heaven, because he didn't want to live a life of thalassemia anymore. And for me as a parent, I knew that when my husband and I made this very difficult decision, that no matter what the outcome was, I didn't want to have regret for my decision. And I now knew after that night that we had done so much research. And if we decided to go through with it, we also had Nicholas's blessing. And if God decided that he was going to take my son, no matter what happened, it was a win-win situation, because he was either going to be in heaven, okay, buddy, or he was going to be cured. And lucky for us, the little guy was cured. But he's actually, this is his bedtime. He's actually getting a little tired.
Yeah,
We're gonna let him go. But Nicholas, what do you say to Sons of Italy and the Cooley's Anemia for helping us? That's right. Okay, buddy.
All right,
Good
buddy.
night. Sweet dreams, baby.
Score 5
Bye,
goals,
Nicholas.
Nicholas.
Aw.
5 goals. 5 goals the next soccer game, Nicholas. 5.
As one mother, to another, when you were saying that, imagine your newborn, or, my daughter's going to be 7 months old. Sure. I cannot I hate when she cries for a second because she needs her bottle. So I cannot even imagine the horror that you went through. And I am so, so sorry, but I'm happy that your story had a happy ending. Yes. And that you're using a platform like this. And I know, you share your story whichever ways you can, which is amazing, to get the word out there about this disease, about the prevention of it, about the treatment of it. And you really turned something so scary into a great positive. So for that, we thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure. We are so blessed. So our job now is to continue to advocate in any way we can. We're going to do a care walk for the foundation in 2 weeks, and we try and hold yearly blood drives through the Red Cross, and anything we could do to give back. We're blessed. Not everybody, as Craig has mentioned, not everybody has the opportunity to go through with a transplant. Not everybody finds a donor. Look, there are 30 million people in the National Registry. My husband, sons, and I were not matches for Nicholas. It was a complete stranger that was a match for him. So many patients would probably love the opportunity that we were presented with, but they're not blessed enough to find a donor. And that's why, until we're able to find a universal donor, the donations to the Cooley's Anemia Foundation, that's what they use this money for. It's to go out and it's to fund research so that we can find a universal cure, so that every patient can have the same opportunity that Nicholas has had. And we thank you guys, because of all the fundraising and money that the Daughters and Sons of Italy donate to the Cooley's Anemia Foundation. You're the reason they're able to do what they do. So we thank both of your organizations from the bottom of our hearts, because it's a team effort. And without all of you here tonight and all of your supporters, we wouldn't have been so lucky.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Bob, let's bring in the members of OSDIA to talk more about this partnership.
Catherine, actually, before we do that, I just wanted to say that I know that you gave an interview to our Italian-American magazine at the Order of Sons and Daughters of Italy in America. And that is literally the quotes that I pulled out that you expressed about your son wanting to go to heaven rather than go through that, and your decision-making process and how you went about it. I think in every tragedy, there can be triumph. And I think that you're such an inspiration on a level so much more than just this particular story. And I thank you so much for sharing how you
Thank
came
you.
to your conclusions, and many blessings to you and your family.
Thank you.
But yeah, sure. Wow, amazing. So Nick, talk to us as the immediate past president, how the Grand Lodge of New Jersey and the local lodges, again, keeping in mind that this is one of our main charities, as Catherine was pointing out, and we're so happy to be able to do that. But how did this particular case, how did the Grand Lodge of New Jersey get involved?
I think it happened a few years back in one of our conventions. We always have Ralph Calasanti come and give a little bit of overview of Cooley's anemia to the to our national or our state convention. And from there, I think what happened was Marianne Ragon de Lambali from the Enrico Ferme Lodge in Cherry Hill went back to her lodge and said, you know what, we need to do something. She did a blood drive. She held the blood drive at the Cherry Hill, at the Grand Lodge in Cherry Hill. Katerina was there, Nicholas was there, a few people showed up. So we had a blood drive. That was a piece of it. So we play a little part into this. But I think Katerina will tell you, her father-in-law is a neighbor of Joe Marcasciano of the Vince Amari Lodge in Margate. And he talked and he said, oh boy, I got a problem, my grandson. And Joe said, wait, hold on for a second. I'm in the Sons of Italy. I am the chairperson of the Cooley's Anemia for the Grand Lodge of New Jersey. And Joe took that and just ran with it. He was already our chairperson, but he really a passion involved with this. I mean, he, took it and said, oh my God, it's a little boy. We have an opportunity. And for the last few years at the Grand Lodge level, Joe really said, it's really simple. This is one of our main fundraisers. And if we can't get behind this, then what are we doing? So he really brought a greater attention to it. We had Ralph Calasanti come to our lodge and to our state conventions, and he's had Cooley's for over 50 years. He's been living with it. Now, 50 years later, we have an opportunity, and technology has changed. And, our little part we played in with was happenstance with the Margate discussion, a discussion at the convention, and one of our members and past presidents, Marianne, said, let's have a blood drive. And I don't want to say the rest is history, but we now, as a state of New Jersey, we can connect with our little Nicholas because we have a success story. We watch Ralph grow up. I'm 59. He's in his 50s. He's under different technology. Nicholas was able to grab the technology, grab a donor, and if you can't shed a tear on the story that you just heard, I don't know what we can do, because we really should get behind this because it's a success story and it's proved to be a success story, and we should just continue with this. And Katerina and Nicholas and the family, I couldn't do it. Yeah, it's beautiful, and congratulations. I just hope we're able to help just a little bit.
We're able to help a lot. And Marianne and Joe, both of those individuals, I can't thank them enough. I mean, when we found out it was that day, my father-in-law immediately reached out to Joe. They were at the beach, and my father-in-law came to me. He said, here's, Joe from the beach, him, give him a call. I called him. He was so sweet and kind and loving. He's like, Catherine, Nicholas is going to be okay. He told me all about your organization. And he said, I have my friend Ralph. Give Ralph a call. He's already waiting for you. He got me Ralph's phone number, spoke to Ralph that day. And he really helped to calm my fears out of anyone, because here he was, one of the oldest living patients in the country with Cooley's anemia. And I was so blessed that Joe was able to connect us. And then you mentioned Marianne, who's such a sweetheart, who I met from Joe. And she at the Cherry Hill Lodge, contacted me and said, Catherine, we love your story. We want to help you guys out. We would love to host our first ever blood drive through the Red Cross in honor of Nicholas. And our family was just so grateful that she went out of the kindness of our heart to do this for us, because the reality is, without blood donations, Nicholas and every other thalassemia patient wouldn't be alive today. I mean, before his 4th birthday, when he had the transplant, he had 75 blood transfusions. So without blood, none of these patients would be alive. And the fact that your lodge, and Nick, that's the day that I met you, you came out and you donated as well. It touched our family's hearts in a way that I can't even describe. I mean, you guys are just amazing individuals, all of you.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you for that, Catherine and Nick. What strikes me about listening to this story is in a microcosm, you, in a very small way, you intimately knew one another and literally gave your blood so that a young boy could live. And yet, from this is why I love this organization, Order Sons and Daughters of Italy in America, is doing great things with so many different charities and scholarships. And we're making rippling effects and helping people each and every day live a better life. And your story is just so inspirational that way. But as far as Cooley's Anemia, because that's what we're about here today, Joe Rondanelli, our chairman of the Cooley's Anemia Committee on the national level, maybe Joe, you could give us a little bit of a breakdown about how it is that we came to having Cooley's Anemia as a charity and an estimate of how much money the Order Sons and Daughters of Italy in America have raised for that charity.
Sure. Cooley's Anemia has always been dear to my heart. It actually started in New York, Rosedale, New York, in Queens, at a little lodge, Per Lodge at the time, one of the local lodges like all across the country. And that was back in 1988, and that's when we partnered with the Cooley's Anemia Foundation. Which the amazing part is, we're the only organization that really is 100% supportive. There's other foundations out there, autism, Alzheimer's, and so on and so forth. You'll see them all on commercials and things like that. But the Sons of Italy is really, the foundation is really their main income in fundraising. When you talk to the foundation, we've been with, 7 presidents of the foundation. We've started with Conchetta Paradiso, we were Peter Chiecco, Ron Averlino, Frank Soma, Tony Viola, and now we're back with Peter Gecko again, and Craig Butler, who's our executive director, who's our main contact. We've done astronomical great progress, watching from the old time pumps all the way to the pill. And I've been through it since 1988. I know I don't look that old, but it's been a tremendous progress that we've seen on the Order Sons and Daughters of Italy in America. I'm proud to say, and I know, thank you, President Bob, we've raised over $3 million from our membership across the country.
And that's, thank you, Joe. That's all those people from all of our local lodges to the grand lodges and the national organization that come together to raise that kind of money, making those rippling effects and differences in people's lives. And Joe, thank you very much for being a chair of that committee on the national level. We look forward.
My pleasure.
Yeah, we look forward to it. So Justin, do we have any questions?
Justin,
You're
he's
muted, Justin.
Well, first of all, let me say that most of the comments that were coming through were to Catherine, and they were, expressing just how moving your story was and how touching it was, and that you're an inspiration. And so that was definitely, I think, a moment in our series that we'll all remember. At this point, I think that we just had one question, and that was to Craig, and that was, there is a new cure. If you could just, I know we're short on time, but if you could just quickly touch on that.
Sure. So there is a gene therapy process which has been developed for thalassemia. It received approval for use in the European Union, and it has just been submitted to the FDA for consideration for use in the United States. So we don't know at this point. It can take a couple of years to go through the whole FDA approval process, but we're crossing our fingers and hoping that in the near future, this will be another option that will be available, that some patients will be able to take advantage of to hopefully provide a cure for them.
Thank you. Well, listen, I'd just like to say as we're closing the show that if anyone is out there that could be inspired by the message that we just heard and the importance of the work that we do at the Order Sons and Daughters of Italy in America, there's a place for everyone to participate. We have local lodges, we have grand lodges, we have the national lodge, we have at-large membership, which is essentially an online membership, and we are making a difference in the lives of other people. And we would love to have you as a member, certainly, and we would love to have you follow us on all of our social media channels because it is so important. And by the way, if you're listening, just do a little plug. We'd love you to go to YouTube. That's where all these videos will reside, and plug that subscribe button for YouTube because we're trying to get as many followers as we can so that we can help more people like Catherine and Nicholas down the road. Justin, how do we get there?
Absolutely. So you can head to our website, www.osia.org. If you have any questions, shoot us an email at nationaloffice@osia.org. And follow us, as Bob mentioned, follow us on our social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, which you can also subscribe to our channel, LinkedIn, and Pinterest. And just a quick teaser in honor of Italian American Heritage Month, with which will be starting on Friday. We will be running a family photo contest for our members. So keep an eye out for that announcement. Back to you, Bob.
All right, awesome. Lisa, everybody on this Zoom, I greatly appreciate, and all the people behind the scenes that make these productions work. And I hope you all have a blessed rest of the week, and great blessings, Catherine, to you and Nicholas for such an inspirational story.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye.
you so much. And be sure to tune in to OSDIA Interviews Live next week, every Wednesday here at 7 p.m. Our guest is Angelo Vivolo from the Columbus Citizens Foundation based in New York, and we'll be talking about their Columbus Day Parade. So stay tuned for that.